All right, we are live with the illustrious Gavin Stone, who has a book right back there.
Yeah, thank you.
And with us also is Lena Sisco. I only have Lena's an audiobook, which is my preferred method of reading. So if Gavin had this audiobook out, I'd still have this to display, but I wouldn't have it there. We are here to talk about primarily elicitation, I think. Gavin and Lena both are multi-talented and deal with many of the dark arts like body language and statement analysis, um, and down the line. I think you're even studying facial reading and things like that, aren't you both?
Yep.
Okay. Now, Lena is an interrogator and Gavin's kind of a spy. So it's an interesting scenario here where Lena is all about extracting. And Gavin's also about extracting, but he's also about being cagey and hiding.
It's what I do best.
So I wanted to bring you two together. You guys have a Clubhouse show, and I actually have a link in the description. They're going to be rolling into that immediately after this. So this is going to be a tight show, probably ending about 5 to 10 minutes before the hour. So that way they have a chance to warm up and get in there. And you may want to go check it out on Clubhouse. And I believe a lot of that show is also elicitation, and you can participate from the crowd, etc., and actually talk with them. It's all audio. So if you have the Clubhouse app, it'll be perfect. But because they do body language and statement analysis, which honestly, I'm going to start with Lena. Would you agree that body language and statement analysis just kind of run into each other and become a blur when you're working?
Yes. So, and I just got done training law enforcement today, telling them the same thing. And I always reference how that statistic, communication is 93% nonverbal and 7 verbal is
Moravian.
wrong, right? Dr. Albert Moravian, right? He did it and he proved it in one experiment, but he even said it was not meant for all communication. And so people ask me, well, what's the percentage? I don't know, but here's what I am going to tell you. They're both super important. And the best way to detect deception is when you look at the marriage, right? I'm looking if the nonverbal is matching the verbal. And if it doesn't, well, there you go. You have a problem.
Yeah, on the Moravian principle, I looked that up too, because it's like he did come up with a number and there was a reason for it, but everybody ran with it. If I recall, what it was is he was determining if you walk up to a person, say hello and shake their hand, that one interaction. And if you think about that one interaction, all of a sudden it makes sense, right? Because how much information do you get out of hello? Well, you could see, well, they sound cheerful or not, but you're going to be listening to tone, timbre, their attitude, everything else. So in the case of a one word or a greeting, that actually makes sense that 93% of it is going to be, body language, only 7% verbal. But they ran with it as like, oh yeah, well, in speaking, it's blah, 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 blah. And I think that's where everybody went awry. I don't know. Gavin, have you heard about that?
Yeah, funnily enough, I was talking about this not so long back, and I was on about the fact that you can take the same sentence and say it with a different posture, in a different tone, and it's got a completely different meaning. Just the words, what are you looking at, can be taken so many ways. It can be a question, what are you looking at, to what are you looking at? And you've got so many different ways that one sentence can be changed. And I've seen it so many times with text messages that have sent the wrong impression. Oh, dear me. The perfect way to convey what you don't mean is in a text message. So I can understand where the percentages can come from, but obviously I reckon they will probably fluctuate depending on the situation. That's my own opinion.
And we've all done that with our pets, right? Oh, I'm going to kill you. Oh, I'm going to strangle you and cut you into little pieces. Come here, little puppy.
Guilty.
It is the perfect example. And yeah, you can say anything. It just depends on the tone. They don't understand. But okay, so on that, I wanted to start off with a video. I have another channel, and I'm always going to pimp it, at least for a while. And it's America's Untold Stories. And I'm doing with Mark Robert. And that we're branching into things like the RFK assassination. We did a trilogy on that. We did a trilogy on the CIA and their chicanery and, being mixed in with Hollywood, mixed in with the news, how they love recruiting their families. You'll be shocked who's in there. And let's just say that when it comes to RFK, JFK, Vietnam, a lot of things, everything goes back to Lyndon Johnson in a lot of ways. So this video that I'm going to share, and I shared it with both of you beforehand, I'm going to have your reactions talking about it on the other show in a video about Lyndon Johnson as well here. So we can all watch the video together. People can learn from it here, and then I can also use the material because you're going to be doing it along with the behavior panel, breaking it down, because you don't just sit there and say things about somebody without actually covering a lot of opinions and views. Obviously, I'm going to project like crazy whatever I want into it because I'm an idiot. But I want to get a good reaction. I think this is an interesting video because it was apparently held back until after his death by his request. He asked for this portion of the interview to not be played. And it says that early on, but for the sake of brevity, I'm not playing that right now. So for now, we're all going to watch together and look at the video. And this is JFK talking. LBJ. All the initials, LBJ with the JFK and RFK on the side. But go ahead and look at this. He's talking about JFK and whether there's a conspiracy or he's satisfied with the results. And it's interesting.
There was no international conspiracy in his assassination.
I can't honestly say that I've ever been completely relieved of the fact that there might have been international connections.
You mean you still feel that there might have been?
Well, I have not completely discounted.
Well, that would seem to indicate that you don't have full confidence in the Warren Commission report.
No, I think the Warren Commission's study, and I think first of all, is composed of the ablest, most judicious, bipartisan men in this country. Second, I think they had only one objective, and that was the truth. And third, I think they were competent and did the best they could. But I don't think that they or me or anyone else is always absolutely sure of every thing that might have motivated Oswald or others that could have been involved.
All right. And another factor that I think will be interesting about this is over 50 years ago. So you have cultural considerations between then and now. He's obviously of a whole different generation. He's maybe pre-greatest generation, I would say, actually, because you have greatest generation who are World War II. I'd say he's pre. So what, 3-4 generations ago, attitudes, things like that. But I'm going to guess that everything that you guys determine, you could determine if it was somebody from right now saying the exact same thing. And I definitely want to see what you guys think. Who's going to volunteer to go first? And I'm going to make you full
Got to
screen.
be ladies first, doesn't it?
How did I know that? So, Lena, what do you think of this?
Oh my gosh. So he's very diplomatic. But the whole thing comes with, so overall, I think that he truly believes that something else was involved. When he does that big body shift and the camera has to go, oh, where'd he go? Right. And re-angle to him. And he does that prolonged eye blink. I think that he is struggling with talking the truth, saying the truth, because he doesn't want to offend anybody. And if you notice at the very end, he goes through 3 things, right? I think this decision was made by the most ablest and blah, 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 blah. He's so still. He is so different from the rest of the interview. And I really think he walks that line to say, you know what? We're all human. We all make mistakes. And at the very end, I mean, he just drops his eyes and he leaks sadness. And he's like, but, you know, other things could have motivated Oswald. And also in between there, after that huge body shift that he does, which tells me he's just shaking off stress, right? He has that prolonged eye blink, which is something emotional, something that he's struggling with. And at one point, he leaks contempt, especially when the interviewer started getting a little accusatory. And he's like, oh, so what you're saying is that, you know, you don't believe the report. And he's like, no, no, no. And as the reporter says that, right before he responded, he leaked contempt, right? He just flashed that contempt, which tells me, listen, reporter, don't put words in my mouth. You know, here I am in the position I am. I speak eloquently. Let me get my saying out. And I'm doing a very good job of not calling out somebody. So he's just remaining very diplomatic, but very uncomfortable. And I truly feel that with that huge shoulder shrug that he did, which is, you know, a shoulder shrug is uncertainty, but he wasn't saying something uncertain. He was saying something definitive. And so that is going against that body language, right? It's not congruent. So if I say, well, I don't know, that's congruent, but he didn't do that. So it's an incongruent shoulder shrug, which tells me he was doubting what he was saying. So I truly believe that he thinks something else motivated Oswald, but he does not want to say it right now. And he also doesn't want to say anything bad about the administration at that time. So that's my overall opinion.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to Gavin here.
Right. I loved it. When you sent this to me, I was kind of hoping it wasn't going to be one of those really, really awkward ones. And it was brilliant. It was loaded. It was literally like somebody got a handful of sand and threw it at me and said, catch. There was that much. There was so much to concentrate on. It was untrue. From the very beginning, you can see he doesn't like the sentence and that he's not comfortable. He's got that, you know, kind of frown going on. I look like I've got Botox, but I haven't. He's got that frown going on, and he's got that squint going on. I love the very first words he said, I can't honestly say. That got me straight away at the very beginning of the sentence. I can't honestly say. That in itself, and Lena will be able to tell you, she's done statement analysis as well, is a great start to kind of tell you that he's not going to be truthful with the sentence that follows. Something else comes up toward right at the very end. I'm just looking at my notes here. It was the sentence fade at the very end of the speech. And he's talking about the administration, and he says, I don't think they can definitely know all the facts about what motivated Oswald or anyone else that could have been involved. And it was really kind of low and slow and down, and you could see a total shift in what was going on. It was unbelievable. There was just tons in it. The other thing was there was a gulp at the very beginning. I don't need to tell you that. You've all seen enough cartoons to know when somebody goes, they're a bit concerned about where they're going. I noticed the mouth movement twice, funnily enough, right at the end of the statement where he's on about the Warren Report Commission. He says the most judicious bipartisan men in the country, and then there's that mouth movement that he does. I can't do it very well, of contempt, and then he happens to do it again. I'm just looking through my notes at whereabouts it was, and I can't see it, but it's twice he does that contemptuous mouth movement. But if you look at it, a lot of the times he's making the statements that he's locking eyes with the interviewer. There are a few eyebrow raises in there later on as well, but at the point he's locking eyes with the interviewer to see if he's believing him, the minute the sentence is finished, you get that flutter of eyebrows, and you can see his stress rates go right up. So, and obviously what Lena pointed out, the shift as he moves from one side to the other at the moment that question is asked, that was beautiful.
Well, awesome. And I noticed too, I felt like that's the whole, are you getting this? And it was, I don't know if it's both confirmational and instructional, but I kind of feel like maybe in his position, and you guys can confirm this, if it is not just a right, but also right, because he is a position of power, imminent power. And are you familiar with House of Cards, both of you?
I've heard of it, but never watched it.
Okay, well, House of Cards is a TV series. It was originally in England, and then we picked it up here for Netflix, and starred Kevin Spacey before he got proven to be a monster in real life, possibly, allegedly. And the character in House of Cards is based on Lyndon Baines Johnson. And in the background, you'll see the Robert Caro books in different scenes sometimes. And those books are all about LBJ. House of Cards is about somebody who went from being a congressman or senator all the way up to the presidency. And many, many, many bad things happened with him. But just a bit of trivia there. I do appreciate it. I think it's a interesting interview. I look forward to it because there's a lot of stuff. And I thought this was a gold mine. This is actually sent to me on my locals, unstructured.locals.com from a viewer. And thank you very much. I should have noted the name, but I didn't, and would have needed to get permission anyway, probably, to say who it was. But what did you think of the interviewer himself going to our baseline subject of elicitation?
I think he was way too accusatory, and he made LBJ feel so uncomfortable. At that point, that's why you see this kind of, hey, listen to me. I call it the bullhead, right? When anybody I interview gets aggressive and they're like, no, this is what I'm saying, and you're going to believe it. They start to jut forward, and that's what he did. And you're right, he is in that position of power. When you use elicitation versus those accusatory, rude questions, you can warm up a person, because at that point they feel comfortable. They don't feel that you're attacking them, and you're not asking a question. You're just making a provocative statement. And people think, well, what's the harm of sharing information? This is just a conversation, and I feel safe. And it's a brilliant technique.
Okay. And I've got a question here from the chat, actually, and I'll put it to our Brit to make it more fun.
Nice.
But Dr. Wood is not a fan of body language and not, shall we say, not a believer. Great guy, does police work. And I think this is a solid question, though. Do you believe that these indicators should be admissible as testimony? Gavin.
Ooh, right. I got hang-ups because I say this to people a lot. The terminology I use so many times is something called dynamic assessment. So you can turn around and it's been taken, so many things with body language have been taken out of context for so many years. They hear one thing like folding your arms means you're being defensive, and they run with it. And what they don't understand is that folding your arms might be because it's cold. It might be because you've hurt your elbow. There could be any number of reasons. So there is no body language dictionary where one movement equals one translation to X. So you can't have a definitive X means Y situation that you could put in a court of law and say, every time somebody does this, they do that. They did it on this occasion, so therefore they're guilty. And that would be what really would be a problem, unless you had somebody giving an expert opinion and say, look, you're going to have to trust my opinion. I've done the studies, I've baselined this person, I know what I'm looking for, and it's not just a case of taking a sign, it's taking my word as the expert. You're paying me for my expertise. That's taken me 20 years to learn how to do this. So,
but is it testimony? Lena, is it testimony? I mean, that's a very specific threshold of, we're going to court, we got a body language expert. Should this be admittable testimony? I think it's a good question.
So I will go and tell you that I actually was admitted as a witness, and my assessment was admitted into the court. The judge approved it, and it was as evidence. However, it was not just body language. And this is my little pet peeve. You can't just assess body language. You have to assess people's words. And then you have to assess when you see the nonverbal indicator at the same exact time that you hear the words they're saying. And if you can't conduct that marriage and say the moment that he said, I didn't kill X, is the moment his body or facial expression of emotion or hands or feet or whatever did this, right? So that's what you have to do. The only accurate indicator of deception is when you can identify that behavioral incongruence. So you have to be analyzing the words at the same time as the body language. Nonverbals alone, they do tell me information, but you need the words as well. And of course, you have to be doing this for years. You can't just pick up a book and say, oh, well, this means that they avoided eye contact, they're lying. It doesn't work that way. Even when I teach body language, I have a rule of 3. Number 1, you have to baseline that person, right? And it's when they're relaxed. It's when they're comfortable. Even that baseline nervousness, you have to be able to get a read on the overall demeanor. That, Eric, includes breathing. It includes what you're doing with your eyebrows, right? It includes facial expressions of emotion. It includes if you're fidgety, if you're not fidgety, your tone of voice, your rate of speech. That's a baseline. You baseline verbal and nonverbal. And when any of that changes and you see known indicators, right, of deception, now you can really get into that analysis part.
Okay, and to push back a little bit, and I can see, Dr. Wood here. I'll agree there are indicators to deception, but there's no way to connect what the deception is.
Ooh.
And I think that's very, very solid. So, and maybe my view is a little different or nuanced, but I feel like body language, statement analysis, and all that is an investigative tool
Yes.
versus evidence. Like, there's something going on here. Perhaps we should look into that further and then go collect the evidence that's actually relevant to the case, and the only reason to testify might be, well, why did you go pursue this person? Well, because of these reasons, but I didn't make a determination. I just determined there's something wrong. Gavin, your thoughts?
Have you ever seen what's it called, Spaced? It was a low budget series with Simon Pegg before he did Shaun of the Dead. And if you've ever, it wasn't very popular, unfortunately. It was a bit of a cult thing. Anyway, there's a particular character in it. His name's Brian. And Brian gets asked if he's gay. And his response was, no. And it was the only funny moment in the entire series. And I just remember thinking to myself, he shouldn't have needed that long to think about it. So, and that is a typical example of, you don't need to be a body language expert. You don't need to be a statement analysis expert to know that there's something not right with that answer. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily point to a lie, but it definitely does point to something that you can investigate further and say, hang on, I want to go down that path a little bit more. There's something missing there. And if I travel this path long enough, I can find out what the lie is or what's being concealed or that kind of thing.
Okay, now this is going to lead into, and I'm actually weaving a path, and we are going into interrogation and elicitation, because I think elicitation is part of interrogation as well. Lena, how you have probably the widest range in terms of interviewing, and you're interviewing culturally different people than yourself, specifically. You also have the added problem, I don't think you speak Arabic fluently.
No.
Or at all. Okay, so
No.
or Urdu or
Pashtun.
Thank you. Exactly. So
Uyghur.
this is all a factor because you worked on Gitmo. How do you go about, and I'm very, very specifically interested because I do want to focus on gender. I feel like we hide things, like gender and beauty and other things like that. I mean, you resemble Jennifer Aniston. Everybody talks about that. And you are interviewing people of a different culture that have very strong feelings towards females. So how do you go in and question folks like that?
The same way I go in and question anybody. So I get asked this question all the time. How was it being a female in Gitmo? Because you're dealing with a culture who inherently disrespects females. Well, they may disrespect females in their culture, but I'm not in their culture. So I was considered a third gender. I was female, but I looked like a man. I mean, I looked like a female, but I was in the military uniform. And so they looked at me and they're like, wait a minute, she's a person of authority because the 50-plus-year-old male interpreter is showing her respect. The male guards are showing her respect. She's a female. And who is she? What is she? So I was more of a curiosity to them. And I walked into an interrogation room. Nobody felt like they had to one-up me. I don't walk in. Nobody's feeling like the bravado, right? I'm non-threatening. And so immediately they were more inquisitive And I built amazing rapport. So sex never came into the picture. And most people find that bizarre because they assume, well, how can that be? They had to disrespect you. Now, I did have one out of the hundreds and hundreds of interrogations I conducted. I had one detainee tell me, I can't look at you because you're female. I said, no problem. Look at the wall, but we're still going to have a conversation. And he did. And that was
Okay.
that.
Well, I have one other question. I'll get to Gavin. I won't always be fair about this stuff, but one of my concerns would be my interpreter. And the reason is I need to convey a tone, a feeling, and also clarity in what I'm actually saying or asking. Not every word translates. There are little phrases and nuances that just don't fit the language, or patterns of behavior that they're just different. Is half of your job interpreting the body language of the interpreter?
Yes, it can be. If I was working with an interpreter that was new and I hadn't worked with them before, I had to vet them. So I had to know whether or not I could trust them. And let's just face it, we needed interpreters at the time. But I was lucky because of where I was. Most of my interpreters had been vetted already before they came to the island. But if you're overseas in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, wherever, and you have local nationals coming into the camp saying, hey, I want to be an interpreter, and it's time sensitive and tactical, they're vetted, but it's a higher risk, obviously. So when I was working with my interpreters, I needed to test their, number one, where their loyalty was. Was it really helping the Americans or was it not? And number two, how good could they do their job? Because some interpreters just weren't that good. And instead of asking me to rephrase something because they got confused or forgot it, they would just make up a question. And right. And just to get through. And some really tried to work good for me, but they didn't want to upset me. And so they would just ask a random question. Now, how would I know? It's because you start to gauge. There's a million ways to test an interpreter, and you have to properly train them. And that's a whole day class. I do teach this. But you start to gauge when the interpreter has asked an incorrect question. For instance, if I asked you, Eric, how are you doing today? And my interpreter translates, and my detainee goes, that's not the response I should get, right? And
so you look for confusion then?
Yeah. And also the length, right? So even though what I'm saying is translated into a different language, usually the cadence is the same and the length of the phrase or the statement or the question is about the same. If I just say,
so hold on. So it's not like a old, remember the old dub movies?
Yes.
Where it would be like, I feel fine. I did. And you'd be like, how did you get 2 words out of like this, word salad on the screen?
Oh, so. I loved it. I had one time an interpreter, my detainee was going on, right? He was complaining about something, talking. And I'm looking at him and my interpreter looks at me and says, no. I'm like, I think there was a little bit more there than just a no. And if you've ever seen Lost in Translation, you can see that. It's hysterical. But it happens.
Okay, that's a good question too, because again, culturally speaking, and I'm beating the female drum. I'm sorry, but could the interpreter interpret something that they're saying to you as being very, very insulting, and they're just not going to share that with you? Like you said with the no, that's what popped in my head was they're saying something like, "You blobbity blah blah blah." I'm not saying anything to, and the interpreter said, he said no.
Yeah. So 2 ways, right? I would always ask my interpreter, what should I not do or say? Because I don't want to violate any cultural norms or customs. And I don't want to get into something that's taboo, and I don't want to be offensive. So please study your culture. When you are questioning someone from another culture, you have to study that culture. And then on the flip side, I would make sure that my interpreter was not going to offend me. So I would say, listen, you and we trust each other. We have a great working relationship, but I really need you to interpret every single word, even if it's hideous, even if it's derogatory, if it's embarrassing, I need to hear it. And so building up that trust with me and knowing that I could take it, they opened up and repeated or translated everything.
Okay, now Gavin, your turn under the grill. No, It's interesting too, because I don't know all of your background. Why? Because you're a little spooky and you don't want to share, and whatever. He pretends to be my friend. He never tells me anything. I don't know what's up with that. One, I don't know if you've actually done any interrogation, or is yours all about intel collecting? What is your background there?
Right, a little interrogation, but mostly intelligence gathering and investigative kind of work. So my background, I started off at the very bottom and started off with things like process serving, private investigations, that kind of thing. I did everything backwards, and I kind of built up through there until I ended up private contracting to start with, and then managed to get in with the right people at the MOD before I finally became a civil servant. And I was put on the books, and I'd wanted it all my career to be put on the books, properly working for the MOD. And when I finally got to where I wanted to be,
Ministry of Defense, right?
Yeah, which is the
for everybody watching.
UK equivalent of the DOD. But yeah, I hated it, absolutely hated it. So it was everything that I thought it wasn't. And so I stopped and went back to contracting.
Interesting. So, okay. I'd be curious how elicitation works in some of these. Like you mentioned being process server. Is there a case that you have to use that so you're actually finding the correct person to actually serve? I don't know what your laws are there. Like here, I think you have to actually get it to somebody and say, you've been served.
Yeah.
But if they don't want to be served, they might hide.
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same here. It generally starts with being something written on the envelope, not at this address. We're given the details that they have. Generally, they're at the address that they say, not at this address on the envelope. And you knock the door. And one of the oldest tricks, if you're serving to a Dave Smith, is just to knock the door and just say, Dave Smith? And they generally go, yeah. And you go, that's for you.
Okay. And, I was thinking elaborate, like
that's it.
Bring a pizza.
Yeah, and the whole statement analysis thing works well with that as well, because you're looking at the fact that you're listening for what they're saying. If it's a no, they will always turn around and go, no, sorry, he's moved out of here 6 months ago, or he's not here anymore. Or if they answer with, who wants to know, then you're talking to Dave Smith. So it's that's kind of but yeah, the whole elicitation thing, yeah, you can use it. That is a short example where you're kind of, it's what Lena would know as assumed knowledge. It's a kind of question statement. Dave Smith? You're not asking, you're not saying, are you Dave Smith? Dave Smith? Yeah, this is for you. And that's how it usually works. I've had some nightmare ones. I've had to chase people with it. So there's ways where you can. I've had them folding their arms or putting their hands behind their back, saying, "I'm not taking it. Not taking it." And the only thing you can do is drop it on the floor in front of them and say, "Look, but what you do with it is up to you. You've now had it." Or the best one was a guy who locked himself inside his car, so I just put it behind the wiper. So that was it. Job done. He was served. So,
right. Well, I think you could do that here. Like if, let's say, somebody's a performer on the stage. As a matter of fact, that happened very recently. Like at it was either a mayor or city council member or whatever, and somebody just walked in and threw it on their desk, and is like, they're there, they're identified, they're in public. Yeah, you've been served. So yeah, it's kind of like a good, captive audience type of thing. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
you can only hide so much in that regard. Okay, so let's do this next, because I love that you did the assumed thing and bringing up actual points for people. And I'm going to roll into Rice with Gavin. But I want to talk about, well, Rice is also going to be yada, yada, yada. But you're doing it in terms of espionage. And then I'm going to saddle Lena with it to talk about, well, how's that going to work in a corporate type of world, or, in everyday life that everybody actually lives. So Gavin, tell us about Rice and espionage.
Right. So Rice and MICE is pretty much the same thing. It stands for, MICE is money, ideology, compromise, and ego. Sometimes changed to money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And Rice is just reward. They changed money.
What's the
for
third
reward.
one again? To see?
Compromise or coercion, depending on which version you're going off. It swaps and changes But yeah, so money or reward, whether it's mice or rice, is literally just what it says it is. You're finding somebody with secrets. You're paying them a reward for sharing those secrets with you. I won't go into the whole how you kind of scout your target and find them out and do your checks on them. But you have to find a lot about them first before you can't just go in and say, right, he looks like he likes his cash, I'm going to offer him a wad of money and see what he says. You do have to do a little bit of research and find out what's going to work best. Ideology was something it worked well in the Cold War with the Russians. Later on, more so with it was kind of dropped for a while, and everybody was that's ideology's old school now, until the Middle Eastern conflict, shall we say, and it came back into play. Compromise, again, going back to the Cold War, was brilliant. It could be anything from a compromising photograph to evidence and
extortion, essentially.
Oh yeah, pretty much. And E was ego, which again plays to it doesn't necessarily mean exactly what most people would think it was, but you can buy a few beers and play off to somebody if you turn around and say, I bet you know loads of things. And it's as simple as that. You can start the conversation going as simple as that. It is more complex, but that's the basic version. So mice and rice.
I had a theory about ego, and I asked Andrew Bustamante, a CIA spy. Folks, check it out. I'm always going to pitch every episode we can. Ego, I think each of these is more effective, and I like to break it down with you guys. What's effective, what's not. I mean, you would both agree that coercion and compromise is a one-time burn. You do it, but never go for anything else, because you just burn that person, and they will not only probably not be helpful, but they may go out of their way to screw you over in the future because you screwed them over. I mean, nobody likes being extorted. That's not fun. It's not cool. Ego, on the other hand, ego can be an interesting tool. I forgot the name of the spy, Jerry Lee, a Chinese spy. He was convicted, but he was trained. He is CIA trained and selling secrets to China. And I'll go with Lena on this because I have a feeling you might have thoughts on ego. But my theory is that if you get somebody who's well trained and they know all the techniques, that one of the ways you might be able to get them is in terms of a bruised ego. Like you find out where they feel like nobody cared about their opinion, or if they're arrogant that these losers are getting promoted ahead of them. Is that a good approach? Because they already know every other technique, but just to feed into their irritation or disrespect of an institution. What are your thoughts?
Short answer, yes. But here's the caveat. When you use elicitation, every technique, I teach 15 of them, all in the form of a provocative statement. So you have 15 techniques to use on different people. There are some that are going to be amazing on Gavin, but there's others that will not work on Gavin, right? There's going to be some that will work on you, Eric, and some I can't use with you. So you have to profile your person first and pick and choose which techniques are will work on this person. Someone with a big ego, right? Kind of bordering on that narcissistic tendency, not the clinical one, just a little bit of everyone pay attention to me, me, me. It's all about me. I love those people. They are the easiest to get information from because all I do is feed their ego. And you can do that with flattery. You can do it with showing interest. You can do it with a little naivete. So whatever technique you choose, you're always kind of taking the backstage and letting them upstage you. And it makes them feel so good. And when people feel good, their filter drops and they tend to talk more and more. And the more they talk and the more you make them feel good, the more they keep sharing with you. The thing is that you always have to be very sincere. And when I tell people, if you're going to flatter someone or you're going to show interest, then you make it very simple, very concise. Don't oversell it because people will see right through that. I train a lot of salespeople and I help them rewrite their pitch, right? Because you can smell a sales pitch a mile away. And so when I tell them, listen, don't go with the typical sales lingo, because people get it and they automatically start to feel creepy around you and they don't want to hear it. I know when someone's trying to pitch me with something and I'm like, thank you, but no, thank you. Come at me from a different angle. Try to get to know me first. Be genuine in your approach, right? Use the techniques to bait me inside of a conversation. Find out what my pain points are, not by asking me, but by using provocative statements. And now deliver your pitch, because you got me in your hand at that point. You've earned my trust. You've gained my interest. You've earned my trust. And now I'm willing to say, all right, I'll listen to what you're selling me. In fact, I like you now. So maybe this is a good investment I should make.
Okay. And this is a question from audience, which is good. Do you guys offer a one-day class on how to identify customer weaknesses?
Well, I can speak. So I do one-on-one coaching where I will help you individually with scenarios. But yes, we do offer one-day classes over Zoom, depending on whether or not sometimes we travel. I know I travel to people, but online seems to be the way to go. So short answer, yes.
Yeah.
All right,
Now
good.
be the time to actually, if anybody has heard of Lena's company, the Congruency Group, get on the Facebook page of that. And Lena does a few lessons on their live lessons, which they're well worth watching.
And you have a clubhouse that I will be leaving you guys here to momentarily.
Mhm.
And everybody can jump in and get a vibe out of that one too. I really do encourage everybody consider following you over and at least
Thank you.
hanging out for a little bit. So to continue on the corporate side, Lena, that it's an interesting question because you mentioned there's 15 and you have 20 plus years experience. So one thing about Rice is it's short. What are actionable steps that you could do that can possibly get the most amount of, I want to say affinity, I'm probably using the right term, in the shortest period without going too far? Like, be both the least offensive but most effective. Is there any particular technique?
So number one, I have to become a blip on your radar. I have to get you to notice me. And then I have to pay attention to you. And I have to be interesting to get you to like me. Right. And then I become interested in you. Once I get that, and this can happen in 30 seconds, but once I get that first minute and we get each other's attention and we have that opening and I bait you into the conversation, I love to use a false statement technique, because it is the easiest and it's so effective. And Gavin knows this is my favorite technique, but it's just and I combine it with a little naivete, but it's when I say something incorrect and people are like, oh, no, Lena, that's not right. Actually, it's this. And I'm like, oh, okay. Right. And even if I truly may not know what I'm talking about, but then I also can feign it as well. But either way, people always feel compelled to correct a false statement, especially when they know the information, and especially if they're considered an expert in the field. You can really get people talking.
Give me an example real quickly.
So, before, Eric, you kept telling me to get earbuds, but I've done a bunch of podcasts and I don't believe earbuds really have an impact on the quality of the sound.
Well, that might just trigger somebody into full-blown irritation. I don't know. I think you probably want a lighter example, like you're a Sagittarius, right? And that's a good question. What if you're correct? And I'm curious. I want to follow up with that. Like, what if you make an assumption you figure it's going to be wrong, but then you're actually correct? What would you do in that?
It's great because the person's like, I agree with you. Fabulous. Now we have common ground. And that's the thread I'm going to pull. Yeah. And I can use exploiting the instinct to complain, and we can both complain together. And then we both strengthen our bond together.
All right. Perfect. Gavin, you're going to take us out with the one silver bullet technique that is going to get everybody.
Not just yet. I will mention, going back to ego, that you said that for a long time it was considered the most ineffective of all of them for a long time during the Cold War. And what it was, they were using, both sides were using females to try and gain information from the other side. And we had this situation where they realized that if a pretty girl is drinking with you and kind of rubbing
There's
your arm
mine.
and telling you how amazing you are. Yeah, the information that she's getting is not necessarily always going to be that reliable, because they found that people tend to brag, people tend to boast. They might say they've got access to secrets they don't
Project
have.
Veritas.
Yeah, so you've got that issue when it comes to ego. So what they did, they later changed ego a little bit, and now they took it down the path of understanding that everybody has an ego, and everybody's ego is different, and you're more into profiling now and saying, right, what is this person's ego? What makes them tick? And like Lena said about using what the phrase, you've got to know a little bit about them first before you know what technique to use on them. So
Yeah, Project Veritas has been doing a lot with ego. If you watch their undercover videos, like Charlie, I forgot his last name, from CNN, was out on a Tinder date. And he was going on and on about the cryons and CNN and what's going on. And then they had somebody else, I believe it was from the CDC. And I'm making an assumption, but I think he was on a grinder date. And again, going on and on and on and on. And you can kind of hear a boastfulness in their talking. So very interesting. So you're still not off the hook, though, Gavin. You got to take us out, because this is the last point. What is your Gavin Stone sword in the zone silver bullet technique?
So I was talking about this with a friend from MI6 the other day, and I think one of my favorites has got to be what my mentor taught me: be stupid. Just be absolutely stupid. Because not only do people open up to more to stupid people, they don't care, because they don't think you've got the brains to be able to remember it, to repeat it, or to be working in anything like the intelligence industry. So you've really got to go over there with a bit of well, these do 200 miles an hour, don't we? And somebody will turn around and go, no. These are, and if it is, if you do get the expert that, like Lena said, about kind of somebody who knows their field, yeah, they will talk for a long, long time, especially if you express an interest.
All right, well, perfect. And folks, if you're like me and dumb and want to learn more, or just want to learn more, seriously, check out the description. I have a link to the Clubhouse, and why don't you guys follow them over and continue the conversation there?